The Supreme Court today ruled that abortion is completely a private matter to be decided by mother and doctor in the first 3 months of pregnancy. The 7-2 ruling to that effect will probably result in a drastic overhaul of state laws on abortion.
That was how news of the decision in Roe v. Wade was delivered to the American public on ABC 40 years ago tonight. In the 4 decades since, a lot certainly has changed when it comes to abortion in America. The decision, it was made by 9 men. No women had ever served on the court to that point. Today, we now have 3 women who are currently Supreme Court justices. But certainly, a lot has not changed. When the decision was announced, legalizing abortion for the first 2/3 of a woman's pregnancy sparked protests, demonstrations from both sides of the debate. And those protests, they continue to this day. Still, from both sides at the steps of the Supreme Court and across the country. So the passions, they haven't subdued in the debate over abortion, but where is public opinion on this, and what about the law of the land? I want to bring Andrew back for an update. And while it was started in Washington, almost at state capitals across this country, everybody's made their opinion heard.
And it continues to be in flux, Rich, but by any objective standard, the movement in abortion laws recently has been to effectively try to restrict the procedure in any number of ways as a method of reducing abortions and abortion access, this in lieu of changes to federal law or in the Supreme Court ruling. Since 2010, 135 different state-level abortion restrictions have been enacted across America. The result? 87% of all counties in the U.S. now have 0 abortion clinics, and some states have as few as just 1 clinic. It's been done in many cases with regulations, new rules restricting where abortion services can be provided or making the procedure more expensive for the patient or the provider. And then there are some burdensome new requirements for women seeking an abortion. Waiting periods, required viewing and review of fetal photos and videos, forcing women to listen to fetal heartbeats before they can have an abortion. Mandatory ultrasounds, including invasive in-body ultrasounds. Required counseling with pro-life abortion advisors and other hurdles that seem designed to shame women into changing their minds. And additional laws that change some medical definitions seeking to turn legal abortions into illegal abortions. Banning abortions once a fetal heartbeat is present or at conception, even though abortions are supposed to be allowed through the first 28 weeks of pregnancy. While some states have tried to start that clock weeks earlier by defining life as, get this, beginning at the last menstruation before conception happened. Why are those restrictions being tolerated? In part because of the very mixed feelings Americans have about abortion. 70% in the latest poll say they want Roe v. Wade to remain the law of the land. That's nearly 3-to-1 support for Roe. But a plurality, 35%, say abortion should be illegal except in cases of rape, incest, or to save the life of the mother. 31% think abortion should always be legal. 23% say it should be legal most of the time, while just 9% want abortion banned, whether rape, incest, or the health of the mother play a role or not. Rich?
All right. Thank you very much, Andrew. And one more note here about how fragile Roe v. Wade could be. Even with 3 women in the high court, the court ideologically split. You got 4 conservatives, 4 liberals, and 1 justice, as always. Anthony Kennedy always seems to be the swing vote. But if one opening on the high court, let's say a liberal justice, were to leave and be replaced by an anti-abortion judge, I know this is less likely since the last second it could change. Now, Ralph, you do me a favor. You see that toll-free number, everybody? Thank you. That's the number that we're asking you to get involved with right now, 38766-2428. Make your opinions heard on this subject, on this anniversary of it. We'll be getting to your phone calls coming up. But I want to bring in a conversation that we had, and this was earlier today, from the head of NARAL in New York. Listen to a portion of our interview now. For more now on the 40th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, the status of abortion rights today, and the ongoing efforts to make abortion either illegal or just much more difficult here, we're joined by Andrea Miller. Andrea is the president of NARAL Pro-Choice New York. NARAL Pro-Choice, among the leading advocates of abortion rights for women. Andrea, thanks for a few minutes. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rich. I'm happy to be here.
You know, I was a little surprised when I looked at the polls. I expected, from some of the debates that I've seen in certain states in this country, and certainly how prominent it came up as an issue in the elections, both at the Senate level and even in the presidential level, that the American public was narrowing on the issue of choice. And I thought it would be closer to a 50-50 split. But in fact, over years, a growing plurality of Americans believe in a woman's right to choose. I was a little surprised between both the numbers and also what I was led to believe, at least politically.
Well, you're absolutely right, Rich. I mean, the reality is that the American public is overwhelmingly pro-choice because the American public believes in a woman's right to make these personal, private decisions. And the bottom line is the American public supports the march toward full equality and full participation of women in the society, just as we do for many other demographics and groups of people who have been disenfranchised and disadvantaged. And I think that's why you're seeing such a strong support for Roe, and why I think that support has not only been stable, but in fact grown. And to your political point, it's just one more example of how extraordinarily out of touch the political conversation and many politicians, particularly in some of these more conservative states, how fundamentally out of touch they are, not only with those of us here in New York, but frankly with those constituents in their own districts. And
well,
I think we saw some of that in the elections.
And if we could, Andrea, let's talk about that, because I know in the election we saw two Republican senatorial candidates, Murdoch and Aiken, who said such outrageous stuff and ended up losing what were winnable races. But there are two realities that kind of belie both the public sentiment. You go to states like Mississippi, Alabama, South Dakota, and you got maybe one abortion provider in the state, and the state right now, they're talking about 72-hour waiting periods, mandatory, consultation, and they're trying to get rid of it altogether. So in pockets of this country, from a practical and on a political basis, they're trying to get rid of abortion altogether, and it's not some pipe dream. They could actually succeed on a lot of different levels here.
You're absolutely right, Rich. And in fact, that's one of the fundamental problems that women face right now, is whether the right recognized in Roe is truly going to hold its promise, or if it's going to be a hollow promise. And in many of those states and many others that you can see across the country, unfortunately, it is exceedingly difficult to make these decisions and to access the health care that they need when women do make these decisions. Let me give you, though, another interesting aspect of this disconnect. You mentioned Mississippi and you mentioned South Dakota. Mississippi, voters in Mississippi, when push came to shove and they had to put their votes where their values were, those lined up, and they rejected an attempt to adopt a personhood amendment that would have banned not only all abortions, but would have eliminated access to most methods of birth control, as well as prevented infertility treatments. South Dakota, the same thing. When push came to shove and the voters were asked directly, do you want this to be illegal in all cases? Do you want to allow anti-choice extremists to set the agenda? They said no. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is we have politicians in those state capitals who are absolutely out of touch with that, who are not listening to the needs of the women and families in their communities, and who believe that they can somehow hold on to that power over the long term.
Finally, I've spoken to a lot of court watchers who said, one of the outcomes of this last presidential election was that if Romney had won and had followed through on his promises and a Supreme Court vacancy opened, you could conceivably have one justice that could swing and maybe even reverse Roe v. Wade. Do you believe that we have literally a 5-4 court right now, and abortion, if brought back up to the high court, it's on that tenuous a ground?
Unfortunately, it is, Rich. And again, where the Supreme Court is at reflects the politics of the last 20 years and the shift in the court. Let's remember, Roe versus Wade was decided as a 7-2 decision. We are now looking at Roe versus Wade hanging by a thread, a 5-4 majority. And even that, we're not 100% sure exactly what that would look like. And clearly, in the intervening years, both what we've seen in the legislatures and what we've seen even in the Supreme Court is a greater willingness to undermine the right to privacy, to question whether women should actually be able to make these decisions and do so in consult with their doctors without interference of politicians. The ability to infringe upon those decisions and upon those conversations has expanded, and the court has been a part of that process.
Andrea Miller, thank you very much. I appreciate a few minutes on this anniversary.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and again, here's our phone call for you guys at home. You can also sign off online, but our toll-free lines are open right now at 888-766-2428. And on this anniversary, do you think we will and do you think we should see Roe v. Wade overturned, or it's here for a reason and it's the law of the land? And, from a political standpoint, Jessica, I just remember when I thought Mitt Romney took the bait on this, and he had to answer questions about Murdoch saying something stupid, and Aiken saying something ridiculous. That motivates, forget about the way the polls are, that motivates people to go out to vote on that issue alone. It always surprises me why people will go down that road, especially on statewide or even national races, when they know they're going to lose on it. Especially in 2013, I would have thought this fight was fought, but it's almost like you got to pass a litmus test if we're going to get through the primaries on this with the GOP, right?
Well, the Democrats were very effective at driving this issue as a war on women. They started out with it early, and they hammered it through all the way in.
What are you thinking here? Would you stop?
Because the fact of the matter is there's been pro-life elected officials, both Republicans and Democrats, for years and years that haven't made this issue a priority, haven't even touched it.
But you can't blame
on
Todd Aiken's comments on Democrats. You can't blame Richard Murdoch's comments.
No, you can't. But they started
Democrats.
Of course you can. No, I'm not defending what they said. I'm saying that they started very early perpetrating this war on women, and then when you have comments from someone like Todd Aiken, then you clearly have to address it in the media, and it's off topic of what they're trying to do. But I do want to say that Planned Parenthood and NARAL, these groups have become wholly owned subsidiaries of the Democratic Party. I have seen instances where they have vilified pro-choice candidates simply because they were not Democrats, and their whole goal is to elect Democrats regardless of their position on this issue.
But I think there are many of us that would rather have a NARAL or these such organizations than a governor in many of these states that are eroding Roe v. Wade. Look at the state of Texas. I don't know if you've stopped and thought. It's scary what they're doing in Texas. If a woman, I think we all know how I feel in this, how most of us feel. It's your body, any woman. You do what you want with your body. But for a woman, because some governor with an ideology, you have to sit there and listen to a heartbeat when you have already decided that
then you got to go back home and say, wait 3 days and come back to me.
That's torture in many aspects.
But there's a problem for Republicans in getting past this as an issue, because one of the key groups in their base are the religious fundamentalist voters who absolutely make this an I'm going to vote on this kind of issue. And on top of that,
in a primary, right?
And on top of that, you have religious values that are a big thing for a lot of Republican voters who it might not be a voting issue, but it's an influencing issue.
For Democratic Catholics, they've managed to navigate this and be okay with this one way or the other, even though they're clearly on the other side of the church teachings. And I know that certainly gets people up in arms. It's just, perversely, when they were Reagan Republicans, the Big Tent let pro-choice Republicans in there. Nowadays, it's tougher. All right, we got to take a break here. When we come back, we bring your answer into our question. We're going to go right to the phone lines. You see the number there. Stay with us. We'll be right back on this 40th anniversary of Roe v. Wade. What will the future be here in this fight? We're really only one Supreme Court justice away from overturning that landmark decision. We'll be right back.